let's get started. Thank you all for joining. My name is Nathan Heath with Cultivate, and my brother Luke is behind the scenes running that computer and answering any other questions and passing them on to me. What we do, we formed a business where we build and install raised farm boxes. I have a lifetime of farming experience, and Luke spent most of his life in technology, so we've combined those two experiences and created a business to help people grow as much food as possible. And that's part of what this is combining technology to share my knowledge with Luke's help on technology and live streaming, so you all can benefit and grow more food. So what we want to talk about tonight is soil. And kind of the reason I wanted to go over this in only our second class is because it's something I see a lot of problems people have when I go to the house or when I talk to them, is that they buy compost either from a landscape company or bagged at Home Depot or something like that, and then plant directly into it, and their plants struggle. And when you have a bad foundation, it's just really hard to ever get really the yields you need after that. So that's really why I wanted to start here. So if you think, I was trying to think about how do we talk about soil in a way that isn't like academic PhD type level. There's tons of books and doctoral thesis written on that subject if you really want to geek out on it. But talk about it in a way that makes sense and is actionable steps. So kind of what I came up with was a recipe. And just like a recipe, the more ingredients you add, the more complex it is. And that's sort of the same with soil. So if we're, say, building a cake, we want to have a good structure so the cake will hold together. And so that's the same with when you're building soil. So on my right here, probably your far left, is a finished compost. And so basically what that is, it's after it's gone through the complete decomposition process, but it's not active. I mean, it's still alive, but it's not actively going through decomposition because it's broken down so much you can't tell the sum of its parts. And that's kind of how you define it. And while it's fine, there's nothing wrong with it, it isn't complete enough for a plant to derive the minerals and the nutrients it needs. And that's where organic matter comes in. And organic matter is, in the short, anything that was living and had carbon. So it can be everything from lawn clippings to leaves to even animal byproducts and humans, and tree branches, etc. So you want to add that organic matter to a finished compost. And the rate with which you mix it depends on how hot the half-finished compost is. And what we mean by hot is as organic matter decomposes, it actually does create heat. And so if you think about, say, planting one of these seedlings here into a pile of 150 or 100 degree temperature soil, it's going to burn the roots. And so the hotter the organic matter is, the less you want to mix with your compost. And so it can range anywhere from 10 or 15% if it's really hot, up to about 40% if it's cooler. So that's kind of the base of what we're doing with our recipe. And that's a good base, but I like to add more. How nature does things, it does things in a very slow and long schedule. And what we're doing here is, even if we're growing organic, it's not necessarily how nature does things. And so we want to speed up that process. And so how do we do that? We kind of jumpstart the recipe and add a little more variance and minerals that really help it get going. So I'm going to go over my notes here, make sure I'm not missing anything. So a good structure of a compost is a mix of clay, sand, and creates a humus type soil. It doesn't blow away there. And the reason we want that, clay, it doesn't penetrate very well, water and nutrients, and sand, it penetrates too well and drains well. So we want to mix. So it's something that's nice to work with, and then we can build on, and it holds all the nutrients together. So, if you already are working with soil and say it's really clay, you can add a lot of organic matter that's highly decomposed compost, and it'll soften it up. You can also add peat moss or different things like that. If you have a really sandy soil, you can actually add clay and different things like that to give it a little more structure so it holds a little better. So that's kind of where we're there. Let's see. All right, covered all of that. So next you can kind of see on the board, I have some amendments laid out, like those that were here early heard. Unfortunately, a couple of my favorite amendments we used up on our last job, and I haven't had time to re-up. So we're going to talk about those in what that kind of recipe is and things like that. You know. All right, covered all the first points there. So the third point is the amendments. So you can kind of see here, and I'll point to what I have here. So this is bentonite. And what bentonite is basically a clay, and it has some tremendous absorption value. And so in the box behind me, what we want to be able to do is have them have a real high water holding capacity so they don't dry out too fast. And so that's why we add some bentonite. And I usually, for a 4x8 box, might add a shovel or two. And I just kind of incorporate it in as I'm filling the box and building my recipe. Next to that is organic fertilizer. And so I always mix in a balanced organic fertilizer so that, you know, the plants are really getting all the nutrients in the right balance of NPK that they need to grow. Next to that, on the your far right, my left, is dried molasses. And that's actually one of my favorite things. And the reason I like to use it is it's like a sugar rush for microbes, and it really just jump starts them. We can build a box and fill it with this soil mix and come back in a week and it's already developing a living organism system there, and you can really see the plants already benefiting from that. Unfortunately, in the 2 empty spots there, you see that we don't have. The other one is green sand, and what green sand is where the oceans receded long ago, and it's mainly mined up in Dallas actually. And it's from all the mineral deposits and things like that happen at the bottom of the ocean. And so it's really dense with a lot of micronutrients that plants need. And the great thing about it is it doesn't leach out of your soil very fast. So you only need to apply it once a year, maybe every 2 years. And you really only need a couple cups per raised bed. And the other one I like is lava sand, or lava rock. It's basically crushed lava rock. And the reason I like that, again, is it doesn't leach out quickly. And so it brings a lot of nutrients and things like that to the soil, and it lasts there. It really provides all these small micronutrients in a form that the plants can uptake. So those are kind of the base. You can keep adding more and more things. So for example, in this bucket here, I want to kind of protect them, but we have some worm castings, and there's live worms in here, and they make an amazing soil blend. It's, you know, perfectly pH balanced, and so we'll add some of this too. And their castings, or their eggs, are so small that the capsules are so small that when you introduce castings into your beds, you're going to be introducing earthworms, and so they're going to constantly be out there working for you 24/7. They're going to be aerating soil, fertilizing, and keeping everything going.
Can you show any of the worms?
Yeah, Luke was asking if I could show any of the worms. I don't know if you'll be able to see them on camera.
I think so, if you put them in your hand.
Let's see if I can find any of these. There's a couple of babies.
Our friends.
So these are red wigglers. Yeah, I tried to grab the finished, so there may not be a whole lot of worms in this part. I'm actively eating.
Maybe put some finished on the board.
So that's kind of what it looks like. There's a couple little babies there.
We'll save them.
So I'm going to cover them with some paper so they don't dry out here in the wind. Got to take care of your livestock, right?
So we got questions coming in whenever you're ready.
Okay. Luke said there's a couple questions, so we'll go ahead and take a couple.
All right. This is from Cindy. Do all of these amendments help make the vegetables more nutritious, or do they just help the plants grow better?
Okay. The question is, do all these amendments help make the plants more nutritious, or does it just help them grow better? There hasn't been a ton of scientific evidence as far as to prove definitively if they do, so I'm not going to say 100% they do. All I'll say is it makes the plants healthier, and logic would dictate if a healthier plant is growing that, you know, and it has a more complex recipe of nutrients that it's uptaking, what it's going to be producing is going to be more nutritious. I can't back that by any study, so I'm not going to stand here so anybody can say I'm lying, but that would just be what logic would dictate to me.
Another one from Lori. Where is the best place in Austin to buy these soil amendments?
Okay. Next question was, where's the best place in Austin? That's where we're at to buy these soil amendments. Not all of them are easily findable, unfortunately, and a lot of them are wholesale, more wholesale items. I would check it like the Natural Gardener or places like that, a little more locally owned, plant-focused nurseries. Home Depot does carry some stuff, but they carry, you know, kind of a generalized stuff. You probably could find most of these things online if you wanted to order them, but because they are heavy, I know the Natural Gardener does have its own line of products, including green sand. So I would probably check with them first. That would be my best suggestion.
Last one, I have a household compost bin for organic household food waste. Can I use this as part of my soil mix?
Okay. The next question is, they have a household compost bin, and they're wondering if they can use that for adding to their soil. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. You can. It just needs to be a finished compost, and so, they're not 100%. It doesn't have to be like super fine like this, but you don't want to add when it's still real big chunks. So often what you might have to do is have several different ones going. So you have your main one and you're adding fresh to it. And maybe when it gets to, 50% decomposed, you stop adding new things to it and then start a new one. And then you keep letting that decompose for a little bit longer until it breaks down, pretty far. It's probably hard to see on camera here, but this one still has some recognizable chunks, some hay and some, sticks and different things like that in it. Where this one over here, it's really just fine. There's a couple little sticks, but it's hard to kind of tell what made it. So you're looking more for this when it's still, you can kind of tell what it is. Oh, hey, maybe there's a little bit of a leaf or something like that. That's still fine. You just don't want to add it when it's too fresh and hot. Sometimes that can, in the city especially, attract some pests that want to dig around and ruin your soil and cause problems. You can definitely use it. You just want to generally have to have 2 bins so you can keep going. Any other questions there? All right. So the fourth part, and it's not so much about building soil, but it's about the kind of treating soil as a living organism. And it's often something that's overlooked by people, that the soil is a living thing and you need to treat it like that. And so by adding all these things, you're constantly feeding it, and it's growing and it's going to produce for you. In the soil, there's this invisible web of billions of atoms and such that are working for you, but you need to feed them and you need to take care of them. And that's one reason that in organic farming, plant rotation is so popular and necessary. Is as you keep planting the same plant in the same spot repeatedly, you're going to build up diseases in the soil and pest pressures. So part of having a healthy soil is rotating your crops around, because they each take and leave something different in the soil. So, and it can be hard in these boxes. So, we all try our best, but, don't keep planting cucumbers in the same spot. If possible, try and rotate the whole family. So, maybe don't do eggplant, tomato in the same spot. Maybe you do, tomato, cucumber, things like that. So try and rotate out of the family, so you can really avoid that. And what it's going to do, each plant's going to leave something different in the soil for the next one. And so you got to think about it as a long-term play, that the more you take care of your soil and the healthier you treat it, the better you treat it, the healthier it's going to be and the better it's going to treat you. So that's something I really strongly recommend, is just not keep really drilling it out, planting the same thing. So try and rotate it up. Any questions, Evan?
When should you add amendments? Is it between every planting, or?
That's actually a great question. And my fifth point actually was, when do you add amendments? So this is probably something, I wouldn't say it's the most important thing to me, but it's an absolute must. And that is, every time you plant, you need to add amendments. And that doesn't mean you can't add amendments as the plants are growing. I think that's fine to top dress with compost and things like that, or different amendments. You can add in green sand and lightly work it into the soil even after the plants are growing, because it stays in there a long time. But the most important thing to me is, every time you take something out before you replant, you add in something else. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this finished recipe. It could be a component of it. It could be, maybe you're only going to put 5 or 10% of, not 100% composted organic matter. Or maybe you have a nice finished compost and you want to add that in, but just always be adding something back. And you've got to really think about it in the way that not only is that plant producing food for you, it's also growing this huge plant that has to put out a lot of energy just to survive. And so that energy has to come from its surrounding area. And so you have to constantly be building that up and adding to it. And I see lots of people, in the sake of either economy or time, neglecting this step. And it is not a step that nature will let you neglect. Eventually it's going to catch up and your plants are going to start suffering. And one of the big things that happens when plants aren't healthy is you end up with higher pest pressure and you end up with lower production. And neither one of those help you achieve your goal of growing food. So really you're just, shortchanging yourself by not doing these steps. And so you really got to build healthy soil. You got to keep building it and you got to keep feeding it. The soil is a living thing that does need to be fed. And what you see, it does need to eat them. To keep them in balance, more isn't always better because of how the fungus and the bacteria is functioning in that world. If we feed too much of one thing, say for example something super high in nitrogen or something, too much green compost, it'll start breaking down and it'll offset the balance. And when you offset the balance, maybe you end up with too fat of bacteria, and then your soil becomes anaerobic or something like that. So we always want to keep things in balance.
Question from Catherine Godbold. I have 2 large raised beds, mistakenly used 50% free city compost and 50% organic raised bed soil from Home Depot. Plants failed mostly, some are okay. I'm getting ready for fall. Should I dig most of it out and redo it, or can I fix it by adding soil amendments and compost?
Okay, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. It's basically, they already have a bed going, and they use some free city compost and some bag stuff, it sounds like, from Home Depot, and did not have the results they were hoping for. The plants just didn't produce. The question is, should they remove all that and start from scratch? I wouldn't say so. Soil is a very heavy thing to remove completely. What I would suggest is add to it and just, really find some fresh compost that isn't completely broken down. And it's very hard to buy it bagged just because the very nature of it being bagged cool down. So really you want to add something that still actually has some heat to the touch. There's a place out in Dripping Springs, but they generally only sell it by the cubic yard, Kaiser Ranch, and I like a lot of their stuff. I think Natural Garden might sell some in bulk. But if you could find some that it's still on active compost and it's still alive, I would that, and then I would absolutely add these other amendments to it. Really try and revitalize that soil, and it actually at this point, maybe closer to the dirt, which is something that's not living and healthy. So add these to it, incorporate it into the top, 6 inches, and then give it another go. And then as you're going through the season, just keep adding more and feeding it. And I think you'll be able to recover your soil and it won't be a complete waste.
Another question. My neighbor has some horses. He can give me some fresh manure. Can I add that?
So the question is, their neighbor has some horses and can give some fresh manure. Should you add that? So that is a tricky one. A lot of the grass that's fed to horses in this area, or just generally, has a lot of weed seeds, nutsedge, and things like that, which you don't want to incorporate. While I believe animal byproducts are a great manure, you just have to compost them so hot to kill all these that it does make it really iffy. And I've even seen stuff that's been 10 years old, once incorporated, just revitalized and came back to life with a lot of bad weeds. So, unless you're really sure what they're feeding it, I would kind of lean against it, to be honest. Unfortunately, maybe better for some oaks and trees on your property, but not in your vegetable garden.
Can I add grocery store liquid molasses?
Okay, the question is, can you add grocery store liquid molasses? I suppose you could. The problem is it's going to just go through real fast. If you're going to do it, I would dilute it a lot and probably apply it in a lot of different applications, but at a very diluted rate. Dried molasses you can buy at most feed stores because it's actually fed to animals a lot. So pretty much any of the feed stores, maybe, I don't know if Tractor Supply carries it, but maybe some more country type feed stores, you should be able to get it. Usually comes in 50 pounds, which is a lot. It'll last you a while. It does smell amazing. If worse comes to worse, yeah, I'd probably do store-bought and just really dilute it. There's nothing, it's pretty much the same type of stuff. It's just the cost difference. Okay. If you have any more questions, keep adding them in. We're getting close to being done actually with this part of what I want tonight. Yeah, that's pretty much kind of the most. What I really want to drive home is that is soil is a living thing. It's not something you can just walk away and forget about. And the reason that a lot of people have problems is because they don't think about it as part of the living environment that they're growing in. They think about it as a medium to hold up the plants, and that's what hydroponics or conventional farming is. You just feed them all this stuff, and you just use the soil to hold up the plant. And that's really not the job of the soil. The job of the soil is the start, and it constantly provides the plants the nutrients that they need to survive and fight off pests. And when you constantly have a plant that's struggling for food, it's going to be more susceptible to diseases, like I said, and pests. But also one thing, especially here in Texas, and as droughts come up, the more organic matter you have in the soil, the more water holding capacity it has. So for every percent approximately of an acre organic matter that rises, it can hold 100,000 more gallons. And that's a tremendous amount of cost and value. So, if you raise your soil from 3 to 5%, that's 200,000 more gallons per acre that you can hold. And, it's going to be really clean water. So that's super important. I just can't stress how much that you can't overdo loving your soil. And I just see it as something that's constantly forgotten. And I don't think you have to do a no-chill method. I don't think you have to do some deep digging, but I always incorporate into the top several inches. Nature does break things apart. It just does it at a much slower pace. So people just think that nature doesn't till itself, but it actually does, but just in the 1,000-year time frame, not like we do things in 6 or 7 months. Luke's got another question there.
I have raised beds that I water with well water that passes through a water softener. I used potassium chloride rather than salt as a softener. Is this harmful to the plants?
The question is about using well water and a softener. And
does it even need a softener?
And using what?
They're using potassium chloride.
They're using potassium chloride to soften it. I don't have any experience with this, so I'm not going to speak about that it's going to have on the plants.
I use well water without a softener.
Yeah. Unless you're drinking the water, the plants don't necessarily need it. I mean, it's hard to say because there's some water out here that, its pH is really kind of off balance. But the boxes behind us, for example, they're watered off of water with no softener. It's just out of the pressure tank.
We can't drink it. But
so, it's not, it has a strong sulfur smell for humans, but the plants like it. So, it kind of depends. At my house, I have a water softener for the water I drink, but so it's complex there, unfortunately.
Yeah. Something about, do I need to water the soil as well as feeding it?
Okay.
If you have plants in it, I don't know. What if you just have soil you're working on? Do you need to water it?
Someone had a question about watering the soil.
Should I feed and water my invisible soil friends?
Okay. So the question, I guess, is probably about moisture and feeding the invisible friends. Yeah, it's because they are living. If it completely dries out, they're not going to survive. It can be reactivated and it'll be healthier. Like as you're growing, vegetables, obviously you're going to keep it moist so they can keep growing, and then they just work in unison together. So it's not really something you need to focus on specifically. When you have proper moisture for your plants, that's proper moisture for the organisms. So that's what happens often, especially here in Texas. We have torrential type rain. Is that the water reaches its water holding capacity, and then it becomes where there's no more air in it, and when there's no air in the soil, it pretty much creates anaerobic conditions, and that's when that balance is out of balance, because all these things need air, they need food to live. So that's what happens when you get 5 or 10 inches of rain. It just unfortunately, there's nothing you can really do about that. But adding more organic matter, having a higher organic content percent-wise, helps alleviate those issues. So we're getting close to pretty much, just have any questions, feel free to just answer. It doesn't necessarily have to be about soil, so it's just open Q&A now.
Open Q&A now. We've got a couple of questions about whether or not you should mulch your gardens, if you should remove mulch before you plant, or if you should plant in the mulch.
Okay. We're having several questions about mulch and mulching your garden. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't, so I'll tell you why. I come from a commercial farming background, and it's just not a feasible thing to do. I like to keep my soil on the surface kind of airy and open up and let the air penetrate. And often when I find here in Texas is it does crust up. I just like to have access to it. I like to always be adding things and be able to see it. So I don't particularly mulch. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with it. It'd probably be more a preference. It is going to help with moisture control and, you know, the soil baking and things like that. So you're definitely not going to hurt anything. But I definitely am very much a commercial farmer in that mindset, and it's just not practical on large scale. So, you know, we've experimented with it, and I haven't seen measurable results enough to convince me of the added work for myself, but you're not going to be doing any harm.
They said they love that answer. That's about it for right now. I'd say we have 2 minutes left. One kind of question that I have sometimes thinking is difference between dirt, soil, compost. Just kind of 3 brown things.
Okay. So we have a few minutes left. The question is kind of what is the difference between dirt, soil, and compost? So the easiest way to kind of think about it is dirt is what we build our roads on in our houses. It's in dirt and it's not living. It's just kind of something there. Compost is going through the process of from dirt to soil. So like that's the problem when you see things bagged compost. It depends what the parts were, and when you buy them commercially from say a big box store or even a large composter, it just depends what they put into it. So how good is that byproduct going to be? And I've just never found anyone that produces compost that meets the needs that I have. And so that's why I do this whole process. It's not just, you know, because I love doing it. It's because it's what the plants need. And so that's how I reach soil in my mind. Soil is, you know, happens from thousands and thousands of years of nature doing its thing. And so we're trying to accelerate that. You know, and I'm not even exactly sure where the word compost fits anymore because it's become such a money-making endeavor. And so it's made as a commodity type thing now. And most of it is kind of inert. So,
is it organic matter breaking down? Is that what compost is?
Well, it's organic. That's actually humus. So when organic matter breaks down to the completely unrecognizable point is actually technically called humus, not compost. Compost is like the process sort of it. It's, you know, it really is kind of it doesn't really matter as long as you understand what you're trying to achieve. And what you're trying to achieve is have something that's cool enough where you can plant plants in it, has a good base, so it's got, you know, sand and clay, and it's been composted. You know, it's a mix of things that have broken down all the way, and then you're adding something that's still fresh and breaking down. And the reason you do that is because as things decompose, they release nutrients that the plants need. So if we just plant in a completely finished compost that's not actively in the process of decomposing anymore, it's not releasing the nutrients that the plants need. And you can supplement them with fertilizers and different things like that. But when you go through this process of always adding the organic matter, you're building that soil web, and you're keeping that soil web just really healthy and active. And the benefits it does to the plant are tremendous as far as fighting off diseases, growth, all these different things. And so that's why I say you always have to be adding to the soil, because then you're always feeding it. If we just, you know, use the finished compost, we make it, it's not hot anymore to the touch, and then we go through and we just do these amendments, it'll probably still work. But we're going to be missing a huge step of feeding that soil web, and that's what's really important to keep things really functioning at a high level.
If you're buying soil for a raised bed from a big box store, should you buy topsoil or potting soil or a mix or somewhere else?
Okay. The question is what to buy if you're buying from a big box store. Should you buy the compost, the topsoil, the potting mix, or the 1,000 other things that they offer? So I went to Home Depot the other day because I was thinking someone might ask this question. So the one I particularly went to was the one off of Brody, I think. And they had a compost bag. And what I would probably, that was my choice, and I still think, you know, if you do the best you can in your circumstances, I would buy that. And then they had another stuff, I can't remember the exact name, but basically it was cow manure. And when I kind of snuck in the bag a little bit, you could still see down hay and stuff like that. So I would probably buy those two as my base, and then add these other amendments on top of that. I really like mushroom compost. It's one of my favorite. They did not have any bagged there, and I actually looked around a little bit and had trouble finding any bagged. but I would definitely add that as well. And then again, the amendments, and if you can't find them all, that's fine. Just, do the best you can. It's not about having a perfect recipe. It's about finding the components you can find, work in that. And one reason I believe in the organic is that it feeds the soil. Again, when you use a petrol-based or synthetic fertilizer, the microbes can't eat that. It's not what they feed on, and so then they die that way. And so in the long term, you might get the spike in production, maybe, and that's even debatable, but you're going to be hurting your soil in the long run.
General question about watering. I've heard different advice on watering. Water every morning, drench water a couple times a week, by flooding, or drip irrigation. What do you recommend?
Okay. The question is about watering. Water every morning, flood irrigation, drenching, or drip irrigation. I pretty much only exclusively use drip irrigation, and I suggest only watering when the plants are active and awake, if possible. And I can't really say if it's going to be morning or night or both. It depends on the temperature, it depends on your soil, the water holding capacity, and that's really what you need to be focused on. Not when or how long you're watering, it's how is your soil doing? Is it moist? Like this right here, it's too dry. That's maybe a 40%, and it clumps, but it still falls apart if I just put a little bit of pressure on it. So I'd want that a little bit wetter. This is even worse. That's 20% moisture, something like that. And then I don't want to squeeze this because I don't want to hurt the worms, but you can kind of see maybe it's real clumpy, and if you squeeze it, you'd probably get some water out of it, and that's probably like 90%. So you want a little less than that. You want it where it's moist, but not drenching wet, and you don't want it to get dry. So you have to check your soil, and it'll change depending on the time of year. There's times where we're watering these boxes, twice a day?
Once a day for 60 minutes.
Once a day for 60 minutes. Comes the fall, it might not be 4 or 5 days. It depends on how much it rains. There's a lot of variables, and so don't try and get stuck in a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to find the size that fits your boxes or however you're growing in your plants and your soil conditions. But I'll tell you, the more organic matter you add to the soil, the more water it's going to hold, and it's going to expand that. Same with bentonite. This stuff can hold like 50 times its weight in water. Now, don't fill up a box of that because it turns into this slick, gooey clay that you can barely pull your hands apart. So again, moderation. And that's what all these are about. It's moderation and spreading things out. So definitely check your soil. And it might take you a couple weeks to figure out what's right, but definitely worth the effort.
Can you please list the amendments one more time?
Sure. The question was, can I list the amendments again? So got the finished compost there. This is more of an organic mix. This right here on this piece of paper is some earthworms and their castings. May not be able to get that everywhere. We just have some. The two that there's a blank spot because we used them all on our last install is green sand, and then next would be lava sand. The gray stuff here is bentonite. The darker brown is an organic balanced fertilizer. That particular fertilizer is a 3-2-3. Kind of use different ratios, but I like that one. And then the last stuff on the end there is dried molasses.
7 and 6.
Okay, well that's about it. I did want to ask one other question of you, actually. So we would like to keep doing these classes bi-weekly. So I kind of wanted you all real quick before we close up to tell me what you would like a class on, and we'll try and do that instead of me just coming up with what I think what you want to hear. I would like you to tell me. So if you throw in the questions real quick, give you a couple minutes to throw that around.
Drip irrigation.
Okay.
The first one.
First one is on drip irrigation. I love that.
Pest control.
All right. Pest control. That's going to be a huge issue. So give me
best plants for fall gardens, seeds or transplants.
All right.
Can you repeat that?
We got a question or a suggestion for fall plants and seeds and the transplants, that type of thing. That's good because we're getting real close actually to fall planting, believe it or not.
Yeah, maybe next one on fall planting would be good.
Yeah, that might be a real good one in timely because we're looking at starting putting in fall plants for customers in early September, believe it or not. It's it's kind of crazy, but it's a short window you got to rush into. So
got a couple of check marks next to pest control.
Lots of people having the problems with the pests. So one thing I'm going to say, you'll be surprised how much healthy soil is going to help you with your pests. I mean, it's night and day. When your plants are struggling, they actually send out a signal, and this has been scientifically studied, that attracts pests to kill them. And that's not why they're doing it. Their goal is to go to the seed. But when plants are struggling, they send out a signal. And
there's been no pest control on these.
What's that?
There's been no pest control on these.
Like Luke was pointing out, the ones behind us, there's been zero pest control on any of them. Have applied no pest control. And that's not always the case. It can change year to year, season to season. But just if you really work on your soil, you're going to have a lot less pest problems.
One recommendation for a class would be how to determine what we can grow here.
Okay.
There's a lot, you can't grow that in Texas. Or there's a lot of people saying you can't grow that in Texas.
Okay.
And she's wondering if that's true or not.
All right. Well, we'll probably close up with this one. This suggestion, it was again, what can you grow in Texas? And a lot of those, you can't grow that in Texas. I love when people tell me you can't do something, because I'm just that type of personality to prove them wrong. I will say at our farm, we grow over 120 different varieties of vegetables every year. And you can grow most things. You just want to have to find the right variety. Now, there was a couple things. I did try to grow bananas successfully and was never able to do that, but I have seen other people do it, so I know you can do it. So I think that's about, we're going to wrap it up. So we're looking at doing another one in 2 weeks, and
I'll send out an email announcing it.
We'll send out another email announcing it. So if you have any friends or anyone else you think would benefit from it, just let us know. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us through the website. Again, my name is Nathan Heath with Cultivate, and we install raised farm boxes for people. We do everything in a complete system, which includes the soil, which we talked about, the drip irrigation system, and the planting. We also have another option where we come by and do bi-weekly maintenance, and you can be as involved in the boxes and the farming as much as you want or as little. It's up to you. We offer that in Central Texas, and we're here to help you in your farming journey. It's our website is www.cultivatetex.com, and I'm your host, Nathan Heath, and thank you, Luke, for your help. You'll have a great night.